Thank you very much. Let me now move to the integrated quality and performance report, please.
Thank you, Chair. As usual, what I'll do is I will start by just giving a brief summary and highlight a couple of specific areas, and then clearly address any other points. And then Rob will cover off a couple of points as well, and then the quality dashboard Teresa take us through. So against the core national mental health standards that we are measured against, and we are achieving against 7 of these, as we have been the majority of the year, which is these. Across 4 others, where we are currently not delivering the national standard, we have seen significant improvement across those areas. So in particular around inappropriate out of area placements, CYP eating disorders, both urgent and routine. I think in particular on the CYP eating disorders during the course of the year, especially the Sussex position, we've seen really significant improvement. There was deterioration in the current month, and I'll come on to that in a second, just cover that off, because there was a specific point around over the sort of Christmas period that I'll just cover off. And then I guess, as we have all year, we have faced some risk against the IAPT, so we're now talking about this target. So as part of the planning process, we had agreed with our commission that we wouldn't be in a position to deliver the national target. We agreed a local position. The East Sussex position is that we've sort of delivered 98% of that, so that's really good. However, we're more challenged within the Brighton position. We're currently only delivering 89% of the target. I think the reasons for that, so we have discussed here previously. There is a recovery plan for the team in place, and part of it was related to the rollout of IAP tool during the earlier in the year, when we in effect had to reduce the amount of service provision in effect while we rolled that out and then caught up with that. That said, the position is still not quite where we'd want it to be, and it's not on the target of the recovery trajectory. I think one of the conscious choices we took as an organisation as we entered the sort of, I shall call it the Q4 recovery period, as we froze roles within the teams, we recognised that that was unlikely to recover. So while we are sort of off plan on it, it is an area that I guess we had planned the off plan, we recognised we would. I think it's fair to say that particular target will be a challenge as we go into 2025. So we go through over the next few weeks around. In terms of so those are sort of against the national metrics. In terms of our local indicators, of which we have 12 core local indicators. I'll go into those in a second. I just wanted to highlight though that the 12 local indicators that we picked in effect reflected the breakthrough objectives at the start of this year and what we thought we needed to be monitoring against. Those are reviewed annually, go through a process as we go into 24-25 in line with our new breakthrough objectives, new trust priorities. We will review those 12 and see whether they're still the most appropriate and what update on. Against the local metrics, I think it's fair to say we continue to perform under target in four areas that we have been largely struggling with through the course of the year. Risk assessments, care plans, supervision, and appraisals. I think there is some good news within that, I will say, which is while the graphs on slide 6 of the pack and further on in the pack where they specifically talk about them, look relatively dramatic. I think it is worth saying that the scaling of that is sort of 93 to 94%. So I'm not making excuses for the performance, but we are talking about in the ballpark, in particular for risk assessments, around 1.5% points, slightly more 5% points on the care plans. Within the risk assessments, and I'll leave to Teresa to come on to it in more detail on quality indicators. I think it's worth highlighting that Brighton and Hove and East Sussex are both achieving. And I think one of the sort of helpful ways we've split the plan out now, or the IPR out IQPR out now is that we can see the local divisional positions as opposed to an overall position. So we have seen relatively significant improvements in Brighton position in particular. And again, on care plans, while nobody is quite at target, Brighton are at 94.3. So there has been some improvement in terms of what's happened there, notwithstanding, I think, the broader point that we can do a risk assessment and a care plan, but actually the quality of those plans is also something that I think as we go into 2025, we're looking at in terms of making sure that it's not just that they're done, but they're done well and effectively. A couple of other areas just to highlight from my perspective, and Rob will come on to it in a bit more detail, but I think it is worth highlighting that the medically ready for discharge position and in effect around the activity and flow metrics continues to be really challenging for us. And we do talk about it a lot, and I think there is a risk, sort of Simon alluded to earlier on one of the other standards we were talking about, that we can kind of normalize that and say we've just accepted that on any given day, circa 100 of our beds are in effect you come sort of taken over by MRFD position. A lot of work has happened over the last 2 months. We had the quality summit with all of our partners involved in it. A lot of work has come out of that. Colin alluded to the work we've been doing around housing and identifying that as a real challenge, work with district and boroughs. And there has been some progress in terms of particular long waiters having been now discharged. But I think it is fair to say that an overall level, even the latest position will show when you get that at the next board, which will likely be year-end position, we're still going to be significantly challenged on that. We're going to be at that 20%. And I think it's the reason I highlight it is because it is almost becoming a point where we're having to live with that as a reality. And as a result, some of the choices we make in terms of our savings programs going into 24, 25 are having, in effect, being made because we're having to live with this sort of reality now where on any given day, 20% of our bed base is occupied spaces. So we will continue to work with local authorities and at all tiers. And I think that's one of the things that's really come out of the work through the Quality Summit is that this isn't just a higher tier authority issue. This is a district and borough issue as well as higher tier. But it is a challenge that impacts our flow position quite significantly. And I'll come on to Rob in a second to just give a bit more detail on that. I alluded to the CYP eating disorders position at the start. And while we have seen sustained improvement across both of those metrics for Sussex, I think it's fair to say that in the latest month, we did see a deterioration. But I think it's worth highlighting that of the 5 breaches that 72% relates to, 3 of those were sort of patient choice, family choice issues over Christmas, which isn't an excuse for it, but I guess it makes it more difficult to necessarily hit that very sort of tight 7-day specific target. The other 2 that were part of that breach were related to internal process issues, and I think we've already quickly identified those and put in place new processes for communication and patients around trying to fix those. So overall, that is I think, a good story in terms of how we have improved over the course of last year and this year from what was a very low position in terms of that CYP. We were routinely in 20 or 30%. We're now routinely approaching sort of locally reported data position consistently into the sort of 90%, where we do have to take those very seriously to understand given the nature of that patient cohort. I will stop there on those specific points. I'm happy to take questions now, or we can wait till we've done the guide function.
Why don't we let Rob do his bit, and then pause and take questions, and then come specifically to quality. I don't want to make a false divide, but I think that might be helpful.
In that case, hand over to you, Paul.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Usman. So I just have a few maybe points to raise as well, particularly around delayed or patient flow across our bedded units, because I think obviously, as we just said, it's to some extent it's a new normal if I can use a language to that we've been living. I think some of the key drivers are complexity of the patients, but when I say complexity of the patient in terms of discharge requirements, so whether they need supported accommodation or additional support in the community, I think that's one of the drivers. And across certain of our local authorities is the capacity in the market, either for packages of care or that support accommodation or anything else. However, there's lots of positive work happening with our system partners, VCSC, local authorities, district and borough councils. The housing offer was discussed a few times. We're doing regular multi-agency discharge events or MAID events, as you may have heard about them. We had one more recently last week, which was quite successful, supported the flow. And in fact, we had good buy-in from our local authority in West Sussex. We managed to do it for the first time since COVID face to face, which really started building those relations more and identify patients that could be looked after. And building on the discharge summit, the quality summit, there's discussions across the system around enhancing intermediate care offer for both physical and mental health, what it could be across Sussex. There's no agreement yet, but those discussions are shaping up and there's some models being developed. Obviously, we have discharge outreach recovery service doors, which also supports the flow, which is really, really important to do that. And more internally, we have an extensive patient flow program. And one of the initiatives we're looking at there is how do we use our rehab services, both bedded and in the community as a pool model for step down capacity to support the flow, but to make sure that patients get the right care. And obviously, every patient that's delayed in our beds, there's a potential clinical risk. We're just in the process of implementing new guidance around clinically ready for discharge categories, which will help us highlight any clinical risk for delayed patients as well. That's really positive. Good engagement from operational teams and clinical teams, so that will highlight any risk for us even more. The other bits, I just wanted to move on maybe from patient flow and just mention briefly waiting times. So overall caseloads and waiting times increased slightly in January in the reporting month. I suppose to some extent it's expected after a period of Christmas, although it's Easter this weekend, so it's really funny to mention Christmas, but that's the seasonal pressure. There are some pressure and challenges. Some of that is mismatch between demand and capacity as well. But our waiting times are the median waiting times in the community is 32 days, which is not ideal, but actually relatively in comparison to the caseloads and the demands, it's in a good position. Our waiting times for memory assessment service or in the dementia assessment services did increase slightly in January, and as there was the temporary suspension of the service, we're going to monitor the impact of that as the service is being stood up over the next few weeks and months. I think there's some positive progress around our 52-week waiters, particularly in our adult eating disorders. We still have some 52-week waiting patients in other services, particularly around CAMS, but actually there's some really positive things to say about the longest waiting patients. And again, our operational divisions are taking some specific actions around monitoring and understanding clinical risks in terms of the long waiters. We have a robust waiting times policies being developed and implemented. We're using active engagement policy and also starting to look at validation of our waiting lists as well. And I think that's the key points I wanted to mention at this stage. There's quite a lot of information in the report, but hopefully that gives you a key headings.
Thank you very much.
Hi, so it's a comment really, and it's a comment driven by academic experience and also by clinical experience. Some of you may know I'm a clinician in the adult neurodevelopmental service. The things that you were highlighting as key financial eating disorder pathways, CAMS, being medically ready for discharge because of complexity, patient flow, housing. All of these things, I would wager and have research to back up in certain instances, are related to how we integrate our care for neurodivergent people across us. And we often think that the neurodevelopmental service is a specialist service sort of at the very periphery of the trust. But we have data to suggest in, I think, 3,000 or 4,000 teenagers that ADHD and autism combine to lead to eating disorder. We know that a lot of patients who are waiting for appropriate social care placements are either waiting for an assessment for autism or ADHD. And we know that they often have specific social care and housing needs. And I just want to take the opportunity to say that this is a very complicated issue that requires rethinking how we integrate that knowledge and understanding across multiple levels of the trust. And I don't think that we can think of it as a side issue with a side specialist service. We need to integrate our thinking, our staff training, thinking about quality. I mean, even what Teresa was saying about ligature risk, there's a working group in Brighton about autism and suicidal behaviour that could often manifest in ligature time. And I just want to take the opportunity to say we need to work out how to join this all together for the better of our patients, and also to improve our staff's well-being, because some of these things are obviously incredibly frustrating. And I think by having a better understanding of the nuances of the patients, we can do the patients a better service, but we can also help our staff feel more empowered.
Anyone want to respond?
Well, I suppose there is work going on with the neurodevelopmental pathway. This is at the moment it's still with the ICS to quite a large degree. And I can't remember, Jane, where we got to with this in the end, but we recently had a conversation about what was happening to that programme.
But I'm hearing this isn't all about a programme, it's about the fact that these skills were more widely shared, then actually that would impact on some of these key drivers.
I think it's a bit of both, though. I think
Yes.
in order for us to have those skills, we need to have some provision of those specialist services within as well. So I think it's a bit of both.
I mean, I think it just speaks to everything. Obviously, we need a specialist service, but the specialist service can't meet the demand is such that it doesn't have the capacity. So we have to think, given that is unfortunately a known it's an ongoing problem, how can we embed the resources that we already have and the good practice that we already have across the board? I don't mean this board, but I do mean literally across the board, across the board to improve things that are not strictly to do with service, to do with training and reconfiguration, and basically at every opportunity thinking, are we missing something in regard to these patients, and could that something be how we respond to their neurodivergence?
I've got Teresa and Usman.
So Jessica, I'm sat thinking about the quality priorities that we're proposing for next year and layering on what you're just saying in relation to those quality priorities. So if it's okay with you, I'll contact you outside of here and we'll go through that together. I think what I'm hearing is there's a way of us coordinating expertise and other programmes of work that bring neurodiversity almost as a golden thread through our quality priorities and not separate to.
Yes.
One of our quality priorities for next year will be the rollout of the CQC guidance on how we care for people with autism on our inpatient wards. So that's good, but I'm sure that there's more that we can do together through the lens of the quality priorities.
Yes, thank you.
Which is very briefly, so I think to Oliver's point, there is an element for the ICS, and it's a wider system. We know it's a national issue. I do think as we develop our strategy going forward, there's probably a really important element that needs to feed into that in terms of it answer the question of what is it that we're going to be doing over the next 5 years, or the kind of patient cohort we're going to be seeing. I think we need to use the data that you've talked about and the evidence to help sort of that direction in terms of what we're looking at. So I think it's picking up, that would be probably the best way to do this.
Yeah. Okay, so we'll overlay it on the quality plan, and then we'll pick up the twin approach. But we've got an idea about both where both of those sit. Kevin.
Like a very successful approach that you just use, which is I think a particular example, and then to extrapolate a bit. Can I try the same?
Mhm.
So on medically ready for discharge, we seem to state quite definitively that the root cause of the challenge relates to a shortage of social care commission accommodation. But I mean, are we sure that on that pathway out of inpatient that we've done all we can on our side to psychologically get people ready for discharge? And the extrapolation I want to do, if it's okay, is in my recent trips around the trust, I've had the same reportage from a number of staff teams, which is that there seems to be a lack of certainty about what other people do, about what the next step up or step down is, and that while staff teams work within their own discipline, through their own measurements of acuity and of thresholds, that there seemed to be a complaint, kind of a reportage that they weren't sure that people referring to them or being referred to them understood their thresholds, if you like. So it's a long way of saying, are we sure that within inpatient, that in addition to the partnership work required to help people to leave, that we're doing all we can clinically, if you like, to make sure that medically ready determination is at the right point. And I guess the extrapolation then across all the others is like, does everyone really understand each other's remit, role, thresholds, etc.? Went from a little one to a bigger one.
Let me have a quick go at this, because you've got a lot in here.
Yeah,
Double valid. In terms of it's interesting because MRFD is what I call it, but it is now called clinically ready for discharge. So you have to forgive me if I use the two terms interchangeably. I think it's a very fair challenge in terms of, are we very clear at the point that we label somebody MRFD or CRFD that we've done all the bits we can? I think Rob can attest to the process that happens on a daily basis, in effect, to review those patient lists to confirm that all internal actions that need to be done are done. I mean, the teams in effect do bed calls twice a day. They review those lists, they go through this. So I think we're confident in saying, I wouldn't say, 100% of the time, but overall, I'm very confident that we deliver that stuff there. I think broader point is one that I don't want to keep referring to the strategy because we can't actually wait that long. It is also being picked up as part of our right sizing work for this year. So I think it's a fair challenge, which says, are we absolutely clear that each one of our teams understands what the other elements of those teams do?
I think we heard that with the patient story today, kind of the step up and the step down for like that. That's quite glitchy.
And I think that is where the work that Oliver is doing and the others around the table around the transformation work and being really clear about what are the criteria for certain services, what are the boundaries around those services, and does everybody understand those is really important, because I think it's fair to say that that's probably become over the COVID period in particular, and as we've expanded very rapidly as an organisation, but that's probably not as clear as it could be. And so I think there's a big element of that within the 24-25 plan.
That's great. And I guess it's just people's, clinicians' psychological safety in handing over and handing on, if you like, that it's the right time to move up.
Of course, that becomes even more important when you then start to bring housing providers.
Yes,
exactly. It's shared understanding of quality and shared understanding of risk. Any other, before we move on to the quality aspects, any other questions or points? Thank you very much. I suppose at this point of the year, it's worth saying we probably need, as a board, to review some of the targets in terms of some of the measures and the materiality of the measures. When we talk about the fact that things don't sit, then actually, given we are going to be very stretched, it's probably worth having a conversation about which ones does the board fully intend to meet, because they really do represent. I'm not saying any of them aren't important, but we just need to think where we're allocating our resource, and we have got some quite stubborn, stuck targets. Some of those approach, but some of them we might we might say they're not actually a priority for this year, and I think I'd encourage quick review of that question. Feels like an appropriate point, but we're then clear as a board what we're really going at in terms of what really matters to patients and staff. So we now incorporated quality into the IQP.
We have.
So we just move the spotlight.
Yeah. So there were three things, or there are three things that I was going to talk about, but I'm going to talk about the second of my three first, just based on the point that you've just made, Peter, which is to say that the quality dashboard, and I've got slide 15 open in front of me, if that helps, but the quality dashboard is a dashboard that we incorporated just a few months ago, so 4 or 5 months ago, into what was the IPR, that is now the IQPR. And that dashboard of metrics that you'll see there, slide 15, gives the safety metrics that we'd agreed. That served us really well until this point in time. And when we're thinking about the quality priorities for next year, and we're thinking about financial recovery, there will be a whole range of other quality metrics that we also need to put in. So I think that's the commitment that you've just made, this and so we will do. So we've always said that this is work in progress, this is a first iteration, it's served us well, but it will need to continue to innovate, and we'll do that with the quality priorities in mind, but also with financial recovery in mind. How we monitor those quality priorities will be dependent on us having a dashboard with data in it that helps us to monitor each of those quality priorities, and the same with financial recovery schemes. So in no way is this a fixed dashboard. It will continue to innovate. I'm going to talk us through some of the metrics and some of the things that we're doing about the metrics, and then I'm just going to talk a little bit about national benchmarking. So the SIs, and these are in no particular order, just as they are on my screen. The SIs, so certainly since I've been in post, the overdue serious incidents. So what we mean by that is serious incident reviews that have taken longer than the time frame that we're given for those, which was 60 days of the SI process. We had a large number that were meeting, and gradually over the course of last year, that significantly improved. In this cut of data, this is January's data, we're reporting 13 overdue serious incidents, and as I sit here today, that's at 1. And that one will be finally reviewed off by me tomorrow, and will be with the family tomorrow, and that's in train. We do have to keep a really close monitor of this, and we have systems and mechanisms in place to be able to do that on a daily and a weekly basis every week. In terms of the suspected suicides data, you can see there were 32 suspected suicides in January. And you may have heard Pete and I talking about the NKISH improving safety in mental health services, so the 10 steps to improving safety in mental health services. This is going to be a key focus for us, not only in the metrics that we want to measure, but also in how we deliver on the quality priorities. So some of those 10 key elements to how we reduce suicide rates and indeed then keep our patients safe. This is about things like early follow-up on discharge. So you've got the 72-hour follow-up data in there. No out-of-area admissions, 24-hour crisis and home treatment team, family involvement. We see this coming up fairly regularly. And one of the other 10 is about personalised risk management. So the reason that I raise that is because when we layer on the 10 steps to safety via NKISH, and we start to think about that through the eyes of our quality dashboard, we can start to think differently about how we practice, and differently about what do we mean when we're doing a risk assessment. This isn't this is a detailed conversation. We heard, didn't we, with a patient today who was talking about conversations that she had about risk. And care planning. So we can see that our care planning statistics aren't where they need to be. That's hovered around those percentages for a very long time. It's just very, very different. Our patient earlier today was talking about RAP plans, wellness recovery action plans. If I were a patient, I'd want a RAP plan. I wouldn't necessarily want a care plan as we have it today. then we start to have a conversation about how we monitor the outcomes differently. RAP plans are really good to monitor the outcomes differently. So we start to think differently about it, and that will all form part of the work on the quality priorities for next year. But I can't talk about the dashboard in isolation without talking about the broader context around this. And then the final thing that I wanted to say in relation to the dashboard itself is that we have a number of metrics there that sit within the reducing restrictive practice categories. So physical restraint, brain restraint, rapid tranquilization incidents and seclusion incidents, that all sits in reducing restrictive practice. We are having a quality priority for next year that addresses these areas, specifically rapid tranquilization. The numbers look high, but actually when we dig deep and we look at some of the rapid tranquilization incidents that we're reporting, some of them aren't rapid tranquilization. They're us giving patients PRN, so as and when required medications. So there's a learning and development piece in here for our staff, and also stretching beyond that to thinking together around what's the practice that we need to be aiming for in terms of the physical health monitoring after rapid tranquilization. So we don't get that from the dashboard, but the dashboard helps us to really start to interrogate the data and then to plan our quality interventions around it. One final point is to the point about how we internally assure ourselves on quality. And we are having an updated internal quality audit process that Lucy Frost, our new divisional director of clinical governance and quality assurance, is meeting. And that will come through quality committee either in April or June. And through that internal quality review process, we'll be monitoring inpatient services and community services. I think the focus until now has been quite heavily focused on inpatient services, but how are we assuring ourselves on quality in our outpatient services through our ATSs and other community teams? So we'll be monitoring the quality alongside the dashboard in a triangulated way through those internal quality review meetings. So I'm going to pause there.
Okay,
Take any questions?
thank you. I have a question, but let me check the board. I'm just the board first. Kevin.
Chairperson. No. It was on the kind of the physical restraint and on that side of things. So we've had an uptick in rapid tranquilization and physical restraint. I understand there's some reporting practice issues as well. Just linking the EDI side of things. So, I mean, are we aware of who we are restraining and
So we haven't interrogated the data in that way.
Yeah.
What I have done though is I've had a meeting with NHSE just last week to ask them for some national benchmarking data. So some of these metrics we do get the national benchmark, but many of them we don't. And some of the proposed quality priorities don't come with national benchmarking data. So NHSE will be taking that away, and reporting that back to us.
I think, I mean, internally, are we aware of various characteristics of the people who we are?
Not at this point.
Okay.
We have that data available to us, but we haven't interrogated it.
Okay. There's this piece of work on mental health acumen. That's the that exact issue, right? Making sure that we have a high impact action on the EDI action plan, perhaps as part of the same piece of work, maybe.
Yeah. I think the beauty, sorry to interrupt, but I think the beauty of having the dashboard is that we can now start to have these conversations to interrogate the data in a way that we haven't had that available to us before.
If we're doing it for mental health act, then perhaps it's on a continuum, isn't it? So we could say this.
And Jessica, and just a couple of brief points on experience. So looking back over the year on complaints, this time last year we had 73 overdue complaints. It's now down to 2 as of today. We've seen a significant improvement in quality standards around the responses over the course. Yeah. What I would want us to get to is a point where the response time issues becomes business as usual. So to Teresa's point about how the quality dashboard iterates and improves over time, where we would want to get to is a point where we're looking at more sophisticated analysis of the themes that are coming through in complaints. The other point I would make around the community mental health surgery, the national results are published on the 18th of April, so they're embargoed at this point. But what I can say from the raw results we've had is that we can see positive direction of travel,
around the breakthrough objective we set as a board around crisis care and awareness of crisis care, albeit there is a lot more work to do, particularly in Q1 with the work we're doing as a system.
Thank you. Really good to hear. Thank you. Jessica.
A very maybe point is that it may well be worth having a further conversation. I would suspect that there is a lot to be done in terms of a neurodiversity affirmative approach and thinking about wider support for neurodivergent people that could considerably reduce physical restraint and lack of organisation. That would be a really interesting conversation.
Layering on the new CPC guidance to that point too.
So, a person, Muppet question. Okay. What does this tell you that we're safe? Does this capture the things that you worry about? Or does it feel like it kind of goes in, you know, there's somewhere in here is the kind of things you worry about?
So I feel far safer having this dashboard than not having the dashboard.
Right,
That's the first thing to say.
okay.
That
sounds
as
like
I
a
said-
politician's answer.
No, I do not far safer having the dashboard because we don't know.
Right.
And now we
Right.
have a direct view
Mhm.
into 12 metrics that we didn't have before. There is more to do, and there are more metrics for us to have a direct line of sight into.
Mhm.
And then when we've got those metrics, we can start to explore the conversations and the analysis, to Kevin's point from earlier.
Mhm.
So I do feel safer with the data, a lot safer actually. But I think that what it then opens up for us is how we want to focus our priority time. So to
Yeah.
your point earlier, this could ultimately become, so it's 12 metrics at the moment, it could easily become 30
Mhm.
with policy priorities in mind. And of those 30, are there key priority metrics that give us the main focus? Because I think there will be.
Can I just say, I mean, just taking a longer view, I just want to say how far we've come.
Yes, absolutely.
In the very short time that you've been working on it. So I just want to acknowledge, as not to disagree with anything you've said, but I think, you know, you can only get so far and then you have to stop and look at what you've done and then go further. And I just want to acknowledge the progress.
Absolutely. And I want to acknowledge that I can only ask my question because we can so much further.
Yeah.
Because I couldn't really last it.
No.
Previously. Good.
Can I just ask one very quick question? In terms of conversations with staff and you're working at service level, is this helping you to have those conversations too?
So I'm looking to Rob
Yeah,
as a managing director.
Sort of be careful what you wish for. Absolutely. So, because we, on the divisional level and the service level as well, we can see more granular detail and pick up the exceptions. So sometimes even the business are sort of going quite nicely, but then we don't want to lose sight of those because we suddenly want to group up. So, yeah, that single line of sight is really, really helpful for a constructive discussion. Channel even better.
I guess just to get assurance, the development of this has been taken a while, but it is now done on a live basis on Power BI anyway. So it goes down to team level. So what we see here is just the trust card there, but it goes out so that all the divisional MDs can see it, and then it's the service line level that sits below it, so that everybody sort of is very clear. We use it as part of the QPR process that we do as well, the internal quality review process.
Because how much do you want to eat?
I know, I do want to say it's been, the performance team have done great work. Teresa's quality team has getting this together is taken.
Thank you. And just related to that then, Rob, because in the past, when we have asked for exactly that sort of information to be drilled down at division, it clearly wasn't happening. I mean, when I chaired the mental health committee, we couldn't get that line of sight into what's happening in different divisions across the trust. So now that you have that information and you know data, how are you translating that? How are managers using that to review and improve care?
So there is, I suppose there's two main reasons for me. So there's one, to use this data on a daily basis to make daily operational decisions. So what's happening in my services or in our services on a day-to-day basis, and we can drill that. I think there's some education to be done with some of the team leads and service managers to really use it actively, because it's a new thing for everyone. The other bit is what I described, particularly for my division, but I know other divisions do something similar. It's an assurance process on our internal mini QP, our mini board as well, to look at the dashboard with the same metrics per team level or a service area, again, to highlight either exceptions or bits are going well or bits are suddenly falling off the cliff, what's happening. We can have this discussion and put some either mitigating actions or understand the reasons, ask for support from the executive team or other teams. So I suppose we use it two ways to make the daily operational decisions, but the metrics are refreshed on a daily basis, because some of them are. But for the quality, particularly on a length of stay, occupancy, SIs, and some of the other ones, the longer term, to provide the assurance that we provide a safe and good quality service.
And how's that monitored?
So we have not sure if it answers your questions, but as all divisions have at least monthly divisional governance and oversight forum led by our clinical directors and divisional directors of nursing. And we also have divisional operating group led typically by our managing director in partnership with the divisional team to review that. And that's a recent process. I think it's the second month that got established across all divisions. So that's provided a level of assurance. I'm hoping this answers your.
Yes, it does. It goes, the next question then related to that, so the chief nursing officer. How, once we're collecting this, what we begin to get is a very useful concrete data, and how will we help, how do we plan to then use that to enable us to improve the service, so that, again, thinking back to earlier challenges in terms of the IPR and differences in performance across divisions when we didn't know why one was performing well and one wasn't. How will it be used to actually begin to constructively change that?
Yeah. So an example of this, Joe, would be that we've used this data coupled with our SI learning data and their complaints data to inform quality priorities for the year ahead. So that's how we're using the data to inform the priorities for next year.
Thank you. So I think that we'll very quickly be at the point where we have the data in the integrated quality performance report that we need. We will have the metrics that we need. I think there's always a risk, in my experience, with integrated quality performance reports that you spend your whole time redesigning them. Not the whole time, but you spend a lot of time redesigning them. So I think at some point, my counsel would be that the board needs to agree that it's going to live with the integrated quality performance report as is. Spend much more time thinking about actually how is it going to use it to help it to understand both what has gone on and what needs to shift to performance. So it's not for me to say it's now locked. My feeling is there is just a bit more tweaking to do, but at some point you just need to settle in and live with it. Well, that's the other ones, the risk is that becomes the conversation, and everyone knows that. I'm just making it. Okay, thank you very much. Is there anything else on the integrated performance report, which I know is known correctly at the end of the conversation? Okay, thank you very much. I mean, really helpfully laid out in the report, but also very helpfully highlighted. We're now going to move to the Finance Investment Committee report. I've been asked to present this report this afternoon. Osman and I had a conversation and agreed there is very little to bring to the board's attention that the board hasn't had lots of time looking at already. But we are clearly, reporting the year. The committee reviewed the year-end position. We looked at the situation in relation to the Lindridge nursing home, and we received an update in terms of the progress on redesigning patient services in Sussex. And I think one of the things we were particularly keen to review were the risks that are in the committee to assure ourselves that those are being successfully mitigated, or at least where they aren't, that we know we've got really good actions in place to address that. I think that one of the key things that the board has been looking at is what are the key drivers of financial performance. And I think the committee very much supported the view that actually quality and safety are some of the really key drivers to financial performance. I'm going to pass to Usman
Thank you, Chair.
and then over to the council as necessary.
I will, I won't go through the point in detail. There are perhaps no surprises in here at this time today. I guess I could highlight two things. I guess just for confirmation, the year-to-date position in January was a £4.8 million deficit, which was £2.5 million off the budgeted plan, but was in line with the forecast that we had created. And as a top-line message, while there is, as ever, some risk, given that we're now on the 27th of March, I'm pretty confident that we will deliver our break-even position. Actually, good when I say that, to be clear. That we will deliver the break-even position that we had forecast. The overall variances within the plan remain largely the same, and the overall messages within the financial positions are largely the same as they have been for the last 4 or 5 months. So we have continued to bring our agency spend down, but that is offset in effect, and that is excellent news. But clearly, as you can see from the table on slide 5, is driven by the fact that we're very substantive vacancy spend. Fumid's already talked about the work that we've been doing, so I won't go into sort of how we're addressing the substantive recruitment perspective. We also continue to face challenges in our non-pay spend, largely as we have been reporting against unfunded inflationary pressures, and some smaller elements within specialist placements. I think on the specialist placement, it is just worth, we didn't actually put this in the commentary, and I realised that was something we should have added in. While we are facing pressures this year of circa about £500,000 on specialist placements, the team have done, frankly, an astonishing job over the last 2 years of being able to repatriate patients back outside county to home. So I guess in this sort of, we're always going to see some level of variance, and we're not on that table. The only other thing I guess I just want to acknowledge is during November and December, we had to work very rapidly to take a set of really difficult decisions around temporary seating services, and having sort of worked the numbers through, that in effect led us to be able to reduce our run rate by about £4 million over the course of 1 quarter. That is largely how we managed to deliver a break-even position. So I think it's just, I just wanted to, I guess, acknowledge both the difficulty with which that decision had to be taken, but also my thanks to all the teams, in particular Rob and Teresa and all of the ops and clinical people who were involved in really rapidly mobilising that. And I guess it gives me some confidence that while we are likely to have a really challenging, possibly almost certainly more challenging 24-25 plan that will require difficult decisions around right sizing, there is a lot to be learned from what we did over that period. The good things that went well and things that went not so well that we've learned from, that we will bring forward into the planning process we're already trying to do, to in effect, as we've kept talking about, right sizing the organisation so that we live within the amount of funding that we have, recognising that involved really difficult decisions. Happy to take questions, Chair, on the rest of the paper.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Conscious we've been across a lot of this ground quite regularly.
So I guess it's sparked by your last comment rather than on the numbers, if that's okay. Obviously there was, as there will always be when you make difficult decisions, a response to those decisions. I just wondered whether there's been anything that's tracked through in terms of the concerns that came out as a result of the quick decisions which made save money, which we can learn as we're going to have quite some of those old big decisions next time.
Just brief, I'm conscious, so we'll have lots of opportunities to talk about this, in particular as we have the next board session in April, which will really about the plan. I think the quick ones that come off are the communications between the decision making and then the teams actually delivering it.
Yeah.
And making sure that actually we involve some of the people who are going to do the doing in the decision making really early and upfront, rather than sort of saying this is what we're going to do and then let everyone find out about it afterwards. Now, I think we tried to do with that, but clearly there's always room for improvement, and I've definitely reflected on my own role sort of within that and how I need to work much more closely with not just exec colleagues, but colleagues across the sort of depth of our organisation. I think there's also something about I think our comms strategy actually went really well, because I think there were very few people in our external stakeholder environment who weren't aware of what was happening and kind of weren't prepared. It's not to say, as Dan said, had to live with, we didn't have a number of inquiries and we didn't have questions, and I think there'll be things we can learn from in that in terms of as we move forward into 2025. But we will come back to this in more detail, I think, as we work through the 24-25 plan that next session. Yeah, for the next meeting.
It was only briefly said to my mind, one of the things we absolutely have to do going forward is talk consistently about health and wellbeing, quality of services and effective use of resources. They're one and the same when it comes to the quality agenda.
Yeah.
Okay.
The only thing I'd add, and it's been very well received this week, is closing the loop. So we've asked people to do things. Things have happened. And then what is the consequence of that? Had there been a positive outcome from that? So we sent around some comms this week saying we couldn't send it any sooner because the numbers hadn't been crunched and everything. So we've sent round an email to everybody saying thank you. This is the impact of what you've done.
Yeah.
And I've had some really positive feedback from that email.
Kevin.
I read that was really good comms, and I can imagine seeing the outturn. Just is there also something about us having a plan B, C's, D's and E's ready very far in advance that should similar shocks occur? I mean, I think
You might be CFO at heart, really. I have, and the team have been working through potential plan Bs and Cs. I guess at the moment, the organisation's focus is on plan A, and I guess we're going to have faith and confidence in that for now. But I guess as we get into May, early June, given the scale of the ask, we will be reporting very early on if we think there is risk, and then what plan B, C and D frankly look like, and what we would have to do to live within the financial envelope that we could expect. Those will be more difficult, which is I think we're all committed to making sure plan A.
Well, thank you very much. I mean, that's a very good position to be reporting at year end, and you've acknowledged the fact that that's a team effort, but I also know the numerous conversations you've been having to square this off with various different masters and mistresses. So thank you for that. Okay, let's move on from the finance report. Let's go to the audit.
I think just the last couple of points in previous discussion really touch on the internal audit strategy 2024-2029, which at the audit committee we spent quite a lot of time discussing in all sorts of different perspectives. And I was just looking at the very sort of subtle language here that how we've summed up our discussion. We say a greater focus on financial recovery from a forward-looking perspective, the timing of several audits and the inclusion of an audit on the implementation of the electronic patient record. Now, the electronic patient record I will deal with briefly, but one of the things that I particularly wanted to make sure that our internal auditors help us to do is to track the development and the implementation of that from inception. So that includes how we ready our people to be able to use it and train them so that we get the investment that we expect, but also to monitor the cost so that we maybe will be one of the few trusts who come in on budget and on time. And so that's something that we agreed would be taken on board. But the other point in relation to the wider challenges, which is around the financial recovery, because what we wanted to pick up on was the pressure and the rapid response in November 2023 to the demand that we save significant amount of money. Now, that's the reality, but what we were particularly as the audit committee concerned should be factored into how we make those decisions. And I think what Kevin's saying about plan B, plan A, plan B, plan C, our question was, well, what are we as a trust, what are we as a board protecting when we are faced with an external demand that says you've got to save 8 million? Because it can't just be that we save the money without recourse to thinking about what is it our service users need and what do we need to protect and ensure that even if we meet the request coming from the centre, we are making sure that we hold on to the reason why we're here and deliver that. So that's what that is about. And again, what we agreed as audit committee is that this is something that will come back to you as a board, because I think it does rightly sit with the board, but equally I think audit committee has a responsibility for making sure and asking some of those questions about, so what is the impact of this in terms of the quality and the service that we provide for our service users. So, any questions? Thank you.
Thank you very much.
But he never gets the same number of questions, does he? Never gets the same number of questions.
I'm not upset. I know that's a job well
I
done.
think it's called running for the net and slamming the ball into the far corner.
Yeah,
It
absolutely.
doesn't come back. Okay, fit and proper persons annual report.
Thank you, Chair. I will take the paper as read. The paper serves two purposes. Firstly, to provide assurance to the board that we are compliant and we remain compliant with the fit and proper person requirements that's set out in regulations, with assurance through to the chair. And many thanks to Hilary sat behind me for completing all of those checks, for which there are numerous elements to, and also serves as a purpose with regards to process moving forward under the enhanced regulation requirements following the CARC review in terms of our SOP that we have implemented, which we seek board support and approval for.
So today we need to note the completion of that process. We're happy to do that. We are, and can I thank, I know that it wasn't the most enjoyable or rewarding of tasks that we've ever asked you to complete. Thank you for doing it, so getting everyone over the line. Okay, thank you very much. I have one item of any other business. Is there any other business? It just remains for me to, as chair, to thank you, Joe, for your service as the non-exec director of the trust. You've been a fantastic vice chair. I think the audit committee is unrecognisable from now as it was. I think you transformed it to take a much broader view. And I'd like to really thank you also for the focus on talent management to our conversations. And I hope you can see the impact that you've had through some of the conversations.